have a placard, a public pigeon. They couldn't get in on any of the established kind of promotions, so they started a line of their own. Okay? And the story goes into how they exploit it, how they make money, etc. So it's really hilarious. I recommend it. Okay? And it was written specifically to try to puncture the bubble. And iTunes biographers think that it had some effect in warning at least some of the people of the dangers of those investments. Okay? Another highly recommended reference. This one I don't recommend that you try to read now because it would create some noise, might disturb your kind of fellow people, colleagues here in the audience. It's a telecast of a lecture presented sort of 8 years ago at the height of the bubble, just as things were collapsing, by Mike Odell of WorldCom UUNet. It's available. It was a conference at Stanford. It's available there in a kind of video recording. And in it, well, he has this famous doubling every 100 days prediction that Tom referred to in the introduction, and has much more detail about it, that case. And he concludes with a slide which says, if you aren't scared, you don't understand. Okay? Really very poetic. And that was one of the few slides that were correct and truthful. Because at that stage, telecom industry was over the cliff. They hadn't quite realized there was no support and there was a long, long way down to the bottom, but they were already kind of lost at that stage. That's not quite what Odell meant in that case, etc. Okay? But again, it's very instructive, again, just like the Glen Matchkin railway story, take you 15 or so minutes to listen to it. Okay? So, what happens? In both cases, with Railway Mania and Telecom bubble, you have these beautiful illusions. Okay? There is a seed of truth to it. Again, in both cases, you have a revolutionary new technology. It scratches people's itches, really solves some real problems. There is real money being made, real wealth being created, and so other people magnify it. They want to have a plaque as a public pigeon, etc. They create beautiful illusions and get people to buy into them. And what also happens is that you have these credulous audiences. People listening to them, okay, and moreover, these people then go on and kind of help create these collective hallucinations. They kind of try to create consistent images that kind of incorporate all these optimistic projections, but are not consistent with reality. They are bound to collide with reality eventually. Now, there are only 100 sacks of gold dust dug up, so you cannot have 1,000 sacks circulating, etc. Things along those lines. And in both cases, you find skeptics, a fair number of skeptics, who kind of know the truth or various pieces of the truth, but are not being paid attention to. Okay? Now, okay, why should people have known that things were wrong? Telecom bubble, okay, Stam alluded to, if you simply looked at what was happening on the internet, it wasn't difficult to find evidence that internet traffic was not doubling every 100 days. It was doubling that fast in 1995 and 96. Okay, so again, we have very good evidence for what happened on the internet in the early 1990s. Very regular doubling each year. That was true in 1990, 1991, 92, 93, and 94. 95 is when Netscape shows up, Mosaic before it, and Netscape, etc. Things go wild. Some of these online proprietary services, AOL, Prodigy, etc., now join the internet. The text-oriented, kind of very low bandwidth services now are replaced by graphics-rich browser access to the internet. Traffic explodes. You do have about 2 years where traffic doubles every 100 days or so. By 1997, that disappears, but a myth lives on, okay, and it gets maintained. But even aside from this, even if you don't have the expertise to go in and find the information and collect it, there are some other things. The Odell-Sidgmore talks were nonsense. They're transparent nonsense. They're internally inconsistent. Okay? You go in, for example, with this presentation deck by Odell, you look at what he claimed to be, say, the size of the UUNet network in 1999, which was actually false. It was fraudulent. That size was not achieved till the year 2000, as I've learned from former WorldCom insiders. But so you take what he told you, accept it as truth. combine it with what he claimed, namely a growth by a factor of 10 each year. He actually said explicitly that Usenet network grew by a factor of 1 million from 93 to 99. You extrapolate backwards. So you take what he says the network was in 99, divide it by 1 million, and you look at what the network had to be in 1993, you discover that that whole network, whole Usenet network, which was the largest ISP, commercial ISP in the United States by 1993, that whole network consisted of a single voice line across the North America. Sorry, can't possibly be, etc. Okay, and there are some other inconsistencies too. So this was very clear. Look at some other things. During this period, you look at what various carriers are telling you. Two of the darlings of Wall Street, kind of praised to the skies by kind of these with-it analysts like Jack Grubman, were Global Crossing and WorldCom. During this period, Global Crossing was fairly consistently talking of internet traffic growing about 85% per year, roughly doubling each year. Usenet was talking about tenfold growth per year. None of the Wall Street analysts even noticed that discrepancy. The only person I have observed noticing it was George Gilder. He wrote a little piece trying to reconcile the irreconcilable. Okay? You can't reconcile these things. Remember, this is all compound growth. Over a period of 3 years, Global Crossing would say they are growing by a factor of 8. Usenet says they are going to grow by a factor of 1,000. Okay? Now, of course, what Wall Street analysts care about is money, but still you have one of two players growing by 100 times more than the other, and both are darlings, both are great investment plays. Something's wrong. Nobody noticed it. Okay? And collective hallucination, which makes people blind to obvious things. Okay? Some other stories, again, inconsistent stories from WorldCom, from Bernie Ebbers about investments. I'll flip over it. Financial analyst premises. Again, I can go on. Lots and lots of kind of very jarring things with saying, no, something's wrong here. People ignoring it, etc. Okay. What happened? What about the British Railway Mania? Okay. Well, in that case, yes, there was also a problem. Okay. Again, the investors should have known they were going to lose. But in that case, the problem was subtle. You didn't have anything as kind of blatant as the Odlyzko presentations. They were internally inconsistent. Okay? Story is much more interesting there. Okay? Now, what caused the railway mania? Because it was one of these things that there is not a single good history. And what happened? Well, in the aftermath of that internet crash, The Economist had a survey, and it referred to the two embarrassing collective hallucinations which the telecom industry has preferred to draw a discrete veil over. The two collective hallucinations Economist meant was the long-haul fiber deployment in the United States and the 3G spectrum auctions in Europe. Okay, and yes, indeed, telecom industry has kind of tried to kind of sweep it under the rug, etc. Something probably even worse seems to have happened with the railway mania. It was never really analyzed carefully. And this was so much more painful. Losses were so staggering in that case. People felt it was I'm not sure quite what happened. Maybe people felt it was so painful, they never really looked at them and analyzed precisely what went wrong. There are a few hints. There is a presentation in 20 years after the railway mania at a meeting of railway shareholders after another bubble burst. Okay, so, another story. So big railway bubble of the 1840s bursts. 20 years later, there's another bubble, not quite as big, in some sense, but still a bubble that again bursts, again in railways in Britain. Okay. In the aftermath of it, there is a meeting, National Railway Shareholders Association, and a chap, Edward Watkin, a very interesting guy, very influential railway manager, member of parliament, etc., quite a clever guy. He kind of gets up and talks a little bit, and it's a long story about how this arose, and he kind of identifies potential source of the problem. He says, between 1837 and 85 inclusive, there were gentlemen who rode in their carriages and kept fine establishments who were called traffic takers. He stumbled over one of these gentlemen in 1844 who was sent to take the traffic on the railway called the Manchester and Southampton. It did not go to Manchester, it did not go to Southampton, but it was certainly an intermediate link between these places. This gentleman went to a place in Wales where there was a fair, and there took the number of sheep on the fair day, and assuming that there would be the same number all the days of the year, he doubled or trebled the amount for what he called development. And the result was that he calculated that by sheep alone, the Manchester and Southampton line would pay 15%. Okay? Because that's a somewhat poetic kind of expression, but at least it says, okay, here are the bad guys. Here are the guys, traffic takers. They overestimated the demand for railway service. They are who led the industry astray. And there is a substantial kernel of truth to it. The amazing thing is that practically nobody in the intervening period, or even afterwards, in the century and a half afterwards, referred to the traffic takers. Okay? They were quite prominent during this brief period, and they almost like vanished off the face of the earth. And their story is really interesting. I mean, so I've been digging in, that involved going looking at some of the original evidence, in Houses of Parliament, the original handwritten notes, etc. In that case, to discern what was going on. And what happens is, to explain it, you have to step back a little bit. This is the same chart I showed you before. Now you have these two railway bubbles in Britain, mid-1830s and late 1840s. Okay? I mentioned, so 1840s is a big bubble that causes all the grief, huge losses. Okay? The bubble of the mid-1830s is actually very different. Again, no literature on it at all, which again really surprises me. Okay? It was not that small. It was the second largest technology bubble in history. Okay? It involved real capital investment equivalent to about $2 trillion. The investment of late 1840s was $4 trillion, twice as high. Okay? And nothing else in history compares to it. It was giant. Okay? And it collapses, but the railways that were kind of started during that period, they actually get built over the next few years. They go into service by 1840, 1841, 1842, 1843, and they are successes, technological and financial successes. Okay, and this is again something you don't find in the, say, financial literature. There's a recent study by a famous, investment manager, Grantham, who claimed that he studied like 2,000 financial manias in history, and he says every time there is a big run-up in prices, there was a big collapse. Okay, and he's been a bear. He's been predicting the housing crash in the U.S. He's been predicting stock market crash, etc. Okay, and so he uses it to justify why he's been bearish. Well, that may be true for the 2,000 cases he studied, but it was false in this case. The mania of the 1830s, it collapses, but in retrospect, the investors look back and they decide they got bailed out too early. Okay? It really worked. The only case in history I've been able to find of this happening. Yes, in most other cases, you get a big run-up, then there's a collapse, and people are sorry and cry. Okay? In this case, they are happy. The ones who managed to stay through it. Okay? And the period of the 1830s, of this mania of the mid-1830s, is very interesting. There are lots of skeptics, very often intelligent skeptics. At this stage, Britain has a grand total of maybe 200 miles of working railways. Okay. Most are short coal lines. There's one significant passenger line, Liverpool-Manchester line, which is 30 miles. Okay. And here are people building 100-mile long lines for passenger service. Skeptics are really, really out in force. So some skeptics are kind of on the fringe, and they are kind of easy to discard and are proven wrong. People are concerned railways are going to kill you. Accidents are so frequent, they are terrible. They scare stories about tunnels, dangers of traveling through tunnels, all sorts of things are bad. Other people object to them because of the imposition, violation of property rights, etc., etc. But then there's a number of skeptics who simply say, well, you know, these things may actually be very good for the nation. It's better it's better for these crazy investors to lose their money building out railways domestically as opposed to lending it to those rebellious colonists across the Atlantic or Latin American governments. But they are going to lose their shirts. Okay? And one of these guys is really perceptive. He writes a very long, detailed letter to one of the periodicals.